Good afternoon, and welcome to the American Enterprise Institute for today's event, The Power of Presence, Sustaining Progress in Reducing Chronic Absenteeism. I'm Nat Malkus. I'm the Deputy Director of Education Policy Studies here at AEI, and an affiliate of AEI's James Q. Wilson program in K-12 Education Studies. Today, joined with my friends from AttendanceWorks and EdTrust, we're here to discuss the importance of regular school attendance, to celebrate the progress that we've made in the past couple of years combating chronic absenteeism, and to discuss how we can sustain the progress over the long haul to improve the health of America's schools and the students they serve. Our program today is fairly straightforward. I'm going to take about 10 minutes up front here to do some table setting on the challenge of chronic absenteeism and the progress we've made and the 50% challenge. After that, Hetty Chang of AttendanceWorks will come up and lead a panel of state education chiefs from the great states of Connecticut, Ohio, and Virginia to discuss what states have done, what they can do, and what they need to do to sustain progress in this effort. Then I'll come back up for a second panel with Sonia Santelises of Baltimore City Schools, Ray Saldana of Communities in Schools, and Augustus Mays from EdTrust. And we're going to discuss what school districts can do and how community organizations and advocacy organizations can provide critical supports to sustain the progress on improving attendance. We will have question time after both panels for you, the audience, who've been here who have come in person. Thanks for that. And for those who are watching the live stream and our friends on C-SPAN, can also participate in that Q&A session. You can send questions via Twitter or X using the hashtag AEI Chronic Absenteeism, or you can email questions to greg.fournier@aei.org. That email is on your registration email as well. A couple of thank yous before I jump in. I will first thank Greg Fournier, who did a lot of work making this happen. Of course, I want to thank Hetty at AttendanceWorks and Denise and Lynn and the whole team at AttendanceWorks and at EdTrust for this partnership and all the work they've put into it. I'd also like to thank the Arnold Foundation and the James Q. Wilson program in K-12 Education Studies for support for this work. So why the focus on chronic absenteeism? Well, you're here. So I assume you have some familiarity with what we're talking about, but it's worth reiterating the context. Chronic absenteeism is the percentage of students in a school or a district or a state that miss 10% of the school year. This was an enormous challenge before the pandemic. It's even larger than enormous after the pandemic. So let's put some bones on that. This is data from across the country. There's about 15,000 school districts and charters on this map. And this is 2018 data. Red is bad on this map. So this is kind of middling. In 2018, about 15% of the nation's students missed 10% or more of the school year. That's not great, but that's where it was. And in 2019, it was pretty stable. In fact, it was within 1/10 of a point nationally. In 2020, we had the closures from the pandemic that made the data sort of questionable in that year. And then the next year, we had more closures that also made the data questionable. But in 2022, you can see the red on the map really exploded everywhere. Almost every district in the nation saw increases, most of them sizable, in chronic absenteeism. The national rate went up to 28.5%. That's well more than 1 in 4 K-12 students. In 2023, that's 22-23 school year, we saw some improvements. They were widespread. They weren't as big as we would like. And in 2024, for the states that we have it, we saw additional improvements. Again, not as much as we would like. This is a long-haul problem. You can see this a little bit more clearly on this sort of national bar chart. I'd pay attention to 2018 and 19, which have comparable data. The baseline is very sort of stable at 15%, and then it increased about 90% to 28.5% in 2022. The next year, it dropped 3 percentage points. Again, if we were talking about pre-pandemic absenteeism, dropping 3 points would be huge cause for celebration. course, with the increase, it's either a glass half full or half empty. And in 2024, that's not this past year, but the year previous where we have the complete data, it dropped 2 points, still well above 1 in 4 students. You have to hold two ideas in your head at the same time to sort of understand the change over the pandemic. So this is pre-pandemic data, and there's about 15 million kids in each of these buckets. These are district numbers weighted by the number of students, and you can see that low-achieving districts pre-pandemic had higher rates of chronic absenteeism, higher than the medium achievement districts and still less in high-achieving districts. When the pandemic hit, everyone increased. And in sort of absolute terms, the biggest jump we can see for the low-achieving districts. So this is one of the ideas. Disadvantaged students, low-achieving students, tend to have higher chronic absenteeism. They also have the largest jump. However, if you look across the bars, the relative jump is about 2x. It's about 90% larger than it was before. So the increase affected everyone. And we've had some decreases in the next 2 years, and they are also proportional. So on the one hand, disadvantaged students suffer more from chronic absenteeism. And the change in chronic absenteeism affected everyone. You can see this with achievement, you can see it by the minority percentage in the district, and you can see it by the poverty percentages in the district. Now, much of what we know that's not just descriptive has come from pre-pandemic research on chronic absenteeism. Over the past year, AEI has put together this chronic absenteeism research working group. We got a bunch of professors to come in and help us analyze data from states that they gave us. This is granular student, sometimes student day level data, to understand what happened during the pandemic and how chronic absenteeism has changed in hopes that we can target responses accordingly. And I have some takeaways about this, but many of them are similar to this theme. Absenteeism is up, it's way up, but it's not necessarily that different. Let me put some meat on those bones. Chronic absenteeism increased, and so did absences at every level. So it's not just that we had more kids who are now chronically absent. The students that the students that were the highest absent pre-pandemic, well, now they miss even more school. And the percentage of students that had very good attendance, like 5 days or less, they miss more school too. The entire distribution of absences shifted. Absenteeism and absences are up, but when we looked at the patterns in the absences, like how much holidays matter, how much the weekend effect matter, kids miss more on Mondays and Fridays, those proportionately increased, but they looked like the same patterns. The same thing with the reasons that kids give. They differed at the height of the pandemic, but in 23 and 24, pretty similar. We know that chronic absenteeism hurts test scores. It also hurts graduation rates and a bunch of other student outcomes. But maybe with so many more students chronically absent, it doesn't hurt as much, maybe more. When we looked at this, we did find that there's a difference, that absences are about 10, maybe 15% less hurtful to test scores in the post-pandemic era. This is 23 data. But the incidence, the number of kids that are suffering from chronic absenteeism and elevated absences are up so much that it's still a major problem, more of a problem than it was before the pandemic. Of course, we also know that during the pandemic, we had a huge amount of learning loss. And we wanted to know, well, how much of that was the closures and how much might be attributable to this chronic absenteeism problem? We found that about 8% of total pandemic learning loss is attributable just to the chronic absenteeism that has been elevated over the pandemic. You could say, well, that's only 8%, but it's 8% of a dramatic loss in learning. I think it certainly insulates the importance that we put on this. That's why when I began working with Education Trust and Attendance Works, we came together with this 50% challenge. And this is a pretty simple logic. We asked states and districts to consider and for states to sign up to commit to cutting chronic absenteeism 50% from their pandemic high in 2022 in 5 years. That's a pretty ambitious goal. We had 16 states and DC officially sign up, the two most recent, Georgia and California, and they're welcome. And now we have more than 1 in 3 students across the nation under those commitments, and you can see the states here. I'm proud to say there's too many to list quickly. I'll bring us back to a couple of things that I want to say just before I turn it over to Hetty for the first panel. I would want to commend these states. It's not that they are the only states working on this. That's not the case at all. But they have taken the leadership to publicly commit to a pretty audacious goal. And I've made no secret about it. I will hold their feet to the fire on this goal. I expect them to meet it. And I commend them for their work and their willingness to commit to that. I'd also like to make some key points back on this same graph. Again, I want to hold two ideas in our heads at the same time. The first is that states and districts have made progress, and we should be happy for that. We should be glad and we should applaud it. We're in the right directions. The reductions that we see here would have been cause for fanfare before the pandemic. That suggests that progress on this front is doable and that the goals are achievable. It's also true at the same time that the pandemic changed the game on attendance, and the progress we've seen is great, but it's not enough. This is a long haul game, and that's why we need states to really use their strength and districts and schools and families and parents and communities to bring their shoulders to this for a long-term pressure campaign to get us back so that our schools are operating with consistent attendance for our educational and economic future. And as we start a new school year, there's no better time to start by focusing on a consistent attendance than today. I think the question that always comes to my mind when I look at this graph is, where is the new normal? We see that the old normal was around 15%. I don't love that normal, but I'm worried about where the new normal is. And I'm excited to hear from states and folks that are doing this work about how we keep the focus on it to bring that new normal closer to a good, healthy level. So now I'm going to turn over the stage to Hetty Chang and our state chiefs. Hetty is the executive director of Attendance Works and was doing the work on chronic absenteeism and improving attendance well before it sort of launched onto the front pages. And I'm super happy to be a partner with her in this work. So Hetty.
Please. So, thank you so much, Nat, for setting such a fabulous stage for us today. And I want to say thank you to everyone here. And I think we have about 2,000 people almost registered online. So we are just so pleased about the incredible interest and continued interest that folks are showing in this topic. This is, as Nat said, something that that chart shows this is not going to be an issue that is addressed overnight. It's really going to take persistence over time. We'll get some reductions, and even then, you got to keep working on. A lot of times what happens is you'll get initial reductions, and then after you get the easier wins that are about a little bit mindset and messaging, you actually have to engage in deeper problem solving to overcome the challenges, whether it's related to transportation or health or whatever it is, to actually continue to get reductions. And this is why I'm so incredibly pleased to be joined by these three amazing chief state school officers who show the commitment, the perseverance to keep investing in this over time. I did want to start off by saying we also know that this is possible. And one of the things that Attendance Works did in the very last year when we introduced this is offer up this 50% challenge state roadmap that starts by organizing a team, because you don't get at this work. This is not a solo endeavor. It requires working across departments, across agencies. You have to agree upon your destination. One of the things you'll see across all of these three state leaders is an incredible commitment to using data to inform and understand where do you need to make a difference. You have to establish your priority routes, and we offered these 5: family engagement, student connectedness, relevant engaging learning, health, well-being, and safety, and access to learning as priority routes that address the kinds of challenges and issues that are emerging for kids and families. And while people might have to tailor which ones and how much they work on those to their own realities, those really help mobilize the assets and resources in our communities to get our kids to school. And then you're going to have to share that roadmap and make sure that everyone is part of that, build capacity and partnership, and then implement, monitor, and adapt over time. You can't do this work. So I think there's 2 kinds of leaders. We have to have districts, and district leaders do this work, right? Because that's where the rubber hits the road. But whether you can scale this up, whether you can have districts across your state, which is to get statewide reductions, you're not talking about one district making change, you're talking about multiple districts making change. That's when you require state leadership, galvanizing and mobilizing their department to make a difference. So we have 3 state leaders. We have Director Dakin, and Director Dakin brings to this work an amazing, you have worked at every level, at the site level.
Are you just trying to say I'm old?
No, because then I'd be accusing myself.
Betty?
At the state level. And what I love about your background is it's not only in instruction, but it's also connecting what we do in schools to what we need to do in workforce. Mm-hmm. How do we make sure kids are prepared and are going to be able to be the productive employees we need to keep this country strong? Now, we have also Emily Ann Gullickson. Now, Superintendent Gullickson has helped me remember that she has the distinction of having 2 jobs at the same time. So she is both Chief Deputy Secretary of Education for Governor Youngkin, but she's also the Superintendent of Schools for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'll let her explain how you can use that to your benefit as she's talking. But Emily Ann, what I've really seen is how she understands this from the ground level up, and she came running into her position with a deep knowledge of the kinds of partnerships that make this work at the local level, and brings to that the background I have taught in both middle and high school. Charlene Russell Tucker is someone who I've had the privilege of working with over a decade, I think now. And one of the things that I so appreciate about Charlene is she actually is probably the only state superintendent in the country who came to this from being a nutritionist. So bringing a background of health and family systems and then using that to inform how is it that state departments of education operate. And the commitment that she's brought to persevering on this issue, because Charlene has probably held almost every job in her State Department of Education and also brings that to her work. But so you can see we have a phenomenal panel. What I'd like to do is start by asking each one of you, and if you can take 3 or 4 minutes each, to say, what is your state's goal for reducing chronic absence, and how are you making sure that it is a priority at a time when there are so many other things that seem to take up our attention? So, Director Dakin, would you start?
Sure, thanks. And greetings, everybody, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here and join with us. And I'm humbled to be part of this panel along with Emily and Charlene. This was kind of a no-brainer for us in Ohio. I have a governor that, since he took foot in the governorship, is really the education governor. We've had a lot of governors in Ohio who said they're the education governor. This one has walked the walk. And when I went to him with this opportunity to pledge, he never even batted an eye. It was just, we're in this together. We did a joint press release on it. We set a goal for us for 50% reduction. So in our place, we started at a high point of 30% chronic absentee rate. Happy to report it's now down to 25.6%. Thank you. I have little to do with it. It's all the folks that on the ground level, superintendents, principals, parents, and others. And what we've really seen for us is a couple things. One, we created a unified messaging for our agency. So everybody in the agency sees this as a priority for us. And so the way we talk about, the way we engage people on it, it's a unified message. So there's not disparate messaging coming out of the agency with respect to what we want to do around chronic absenteeism. I think the other piece too is that we did roll out a statewide attendance campaign, literally, and felt like attendance really matters. And we started with that messaging. And that's been well received by many of our constituents. The thing we're working on now, which I think is really going to kind of tip the balance here for us, is that we are now requiring districts, particularly those districts who are chronically low performing, to implement an integrated multi-tiered system of support framework in their buildings. Now that's a lot of jargon, education jargon, but what it really means is that we're no longer going to look at behavior and attendance as separate from academic performance. We're integrating the two together. And this calls for teachers and principals in buildings to look at data and then identify the right interventions immediately as they see the behavior change. And so that is a game changer if we do it well in Ohio. So it's all, as anything, it's about fidelity to implementation. And if we do that really, really well, I do think that that will give us the opportunity, because not only does it tap in on the resources of a school, but by definition, it taps into community-based assets. And that's really, so we've always had kind of a partnership first. As an agency, we put students and their families at the center. They're our primary customer. Providers are a secondary customer to us. And so by leveraging assets that already exist in the community on behalf of that family and that child, we'll have a shot at dealing with a lot of the barriers that keep young people from learning how to read, from being able to do numeracy well, and ultimately being able to show up to school.
Thank you so much.
Was that 3 minutes? Did I do 3 minutes?
I think what we're going to do is we're going to allow each one to 3 to 5 minutes. That's fine. We'll keep going. And Emily Ann, if you can talk about your goal, and then just why don't you move into what are the couple top key strategies to keeping it a high priority and making a difference here?
Great. Well, in Virginia, our peak number was 20.1%. So more than 1 in 5 Virginia K-12 students were chronically absent. And most notably, a lot of our kinders, first and second grade students had a high spike. So appreciated the trend lines, Nat, but we're watching that closely with our littlest learners. And Virginia was 45th in the nation to reopen our classrooms. And so for us to really commit to this 50% goal, we knew we needed to do an all-hands-on approach. 1 year in, as of spring of 24, we were at 15.7%, and we are not stopping yet. So stay tuned for the coming weeks for our latest attendance data. In the fall of 2023, after seeing these attendance data, the stark numbers around the number of students that were consistently missing school, as well as the drastic learning loss that was apparent, especially in reading and math, the governor launched, in partnership with the General Assembly, the All-In Virginia Initiative. It's $418 million. The A in all is attendance. And so we coached with all 131 school divisions around at least 10% of that money for their local division to prioritize attendance solutions. Some said that's actually our biggest pain point, and maybe we're thriving on math or we're thriving in one of the other areas around literacy and high intensity tutoring. But we then went into high gear to really prioritize, first with the governor's leadership, then our Board of Education incorporated chronic absenteeism into its accountability system. It's part of our readiness indicator for elementary, middle, and high schools. And then we really went into how can we identify those bright spots and scale success. So I'm happy to go more into that if you want now.
I think
or
we'll
wait.
take
We'll do a teaser.
A little teaser, and
Great.
then in a moment, we'll talk a little bit more about
Perfect.
something that especially is working for you.
Great.
Charlene, can you talk a little bit about your goals, and then also some key approaches you're using to make it a priority?
Certainly, Hedy, thank you. And it's great to be here with you all and for those online. So I bring a perspective that starts way before the pandemic. I've been in my agency, as you learned, for quite some time. But the issue of attendance was one that we saw as something we needed to pay attention to in Connecticut because it is foundational to student success. And so we've been at this now for well over a decade because it was that important. We recognize, I used to say, even in my roles before being the commissioner, that it didn't matter if Einstein was in the classroom, if the students weren't there, we were not going to get the outcomes that we were looking for. So we've long been on this journey of looking at attendance. And we've long had attendance as a part of our accountability system back in 2012 that we started measuring. So it's a mature indicator in our state. So we were able to see, because of all the work we were doing when we got to the pandemic, I mean, I was raising the red flag when we were at 9%, about 50,000 of our students being chronically absent. And so when we got to the pandemic and we got to 19 and we got to 23, we recognized then, wait a minute, we've got to do some different things here in order to step in and to do more for students. I am pleased to say, and so joining the 50% challenge was not an issue for us in trying to do that. We know how important it is. And our state board have a target that is even more challenging and more opportunity for us because they're looking for my reduction, right? We're now at 17.2%, by the way, and you're hearing this first before release next week because we do have our data out. So from 23, and now we're down to 17.2%, our third consecutive year of seeing statewide improvement. And that's also looking at our I-need students as well. We disaggregate this data, and we do it and look at it almost daily in this work. And so pleased to have that, but my board is challenging us for 6% by 2028. So it really is all hands on deck in doing that work. Some of our priorities, and this is a priority for us. Our State Board of Education, as I said, this is a part of the target work that the State Board is doing. So at that level, it is embedded in our State Board plan. As I said, for us to make that decrease, it's a part of our accountability measure. So everyone in our state understands, we've been educating folks about what is chronic absence before people started talking about it and what it is that we needed to do. And so it is a part of accountability. And so when we release, which we're doing next week, our data on student assessment, we lead with attendance. So it is not hidden. We talk about it as we talk about math scores, as we talk about ELA, we're talking about attendance as well. And our governor, I'd like to think that my governor in Connecticut, Governor Ned Lamont, is probably the #1 champion for attendance across our state, but maybe across the country. He talks about this all the time. We were texting each other last night, talking about where we are in our attendance data. And it is so important to have a champion at that level that will all the time talk about where are students and what's happening. We watch the data. By the way, we collect this data on a monthly basis. It's at our state. And we have boots on the ground folks looking at that data and trying to figure out where we're seeing spikes, what's happening, and how can we really intervene immediately and not necessarily have to wait for a postmortem at the end of the school year. And so we watched this past year, and we saw in February where there were upticks. So we were getting up to 20%. And we're able to disaggregate and see where that's happening in which district. And our strategy in working with our district is then to intervene immediately and to start talking about what do we do, and we'll talk about strategies later, but we're able to do that. We also had a campaign, School is Better With You campaign across the state, supporting our districts in this work and our families as well, and never forget talking to the students as to why they're not there. So engaging the entire community. And our legislature also jumps in the midst of this as well. We use COVID relief funds to support and build out a learner engagement and attendance program. We'll talk more about that. But we use COVID dollars to do that, making it a priority in the state, attendance. I am so pleased to tell you this last budget that was signed by the governor, we now have for the first time a line item in our state budget addressing attendance. So that is the work that we do. Yes, that is worth a round of applause. in getting that work done. And so we have the legislature, we have our governor, we have our school districts we're working with, and community organizations that are at the table. This is all hands on deck. It is important. If we don't have our students there, we will not see the outcomes that we're looking for. And so this is something we all talk about in all our spaces. It is Connecticut working together to make sure our students have what they need and that they can thrive.
Thank you so much. And one thing I can say is, I think it's fantastic when we might have a battle among governors about who's the attendance governor for the country.
It's my governor.
I was hearing that claim across our different states here. And I think that's a fabulous thing, because when we can have our governors partnering with our state superintendents to make this a priority, we can bring that all hands on deck, a strategy that we know is so important. Director Dakin, I would love for you to talk about what you have found to be a particularly effective strategy in your state. And I know in your case, you also have even some other folks through your Stay in the Game collaborative who are involved in this work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it's made a difference?
Sure. So we were fortunate to have some philanthropic efforts at this issue because it's so important. Thanks to Dee Haslam and the Cleveland Browns Football Foundation, got involved early in this process, and we created a thing called Stay in the Game Network. It's become a collaboration between the Cleveland Browns, the Columbus Crew soccer team, FC Cincinnati soccer team, Harvard Proving Ground, and most recently then, Battelle Memorial Institute has stepped in to facilitate that process in our state. We went from something like 13 districts at the inaugural start of this to we are now in 201 districts, and we have 609 traditional public schools and 340 community schools. Now, I'll put that in perspective. We have 611 public school districts in the state. We have over 700 charter non-public, and then we have a large home education population and others. So it really has seeped into all of the providers. So it's just not traditional school districts. It represents a constituency of a number of families. We have great anecdotal data, and we have great quantitative data around how, when Stay in the Game is actually physically in these schools, where attendance rates have gone down, absentee rates have gone down dramatically. And let's face it, I mean, young people like sports heroes. and when somebody from the Browns shows up in your school, that's kind of a big deal. And when they talk about the importance of school and staying in school and persevering and those kinds of things, it really does pay dividends, and we're seeing it in the data. So we're just really blessed to have that opportunity in Ohio, and I believe there's also some interest in some other states in doing things similar. But I have to say, Dee Haslam, one of the owners of the Browns, really has led this. It's been her baby. She shows up to every steering committee that we have, and it's just a pleasure to have somebody that's that committed. We released a ton of state guidance on these things. We stopped focusing on truancy and started focusing on intervention. How's that for a kind of a ha-ha?
Absolutely.
And as I mentioned before, we really do invest in what I call intermediaries, partners. We have a ton of what we call educational service centers around the state that provide services directly to districts. We've invested in dollars in those entities, as well as our school support teams, which deal with the lowest performing schools. So it's been a kind of all in on all these strategies. So it's never one strategy. It's always going to be this kind of, I used the phrase one time, proactive redundancy. It's kind of the idea you take multiple strategies to accomplish one goal. And so we have multiple strategies. I do want to talk about, at some point during this panel, talking about some root cause around some of the absenteeism and what we can do about addressing the root causes of absenteeism.
Okay.
Not to tell you what to do, Hetty.
All right. Well, I would be curious if, Emily Ann, could you talk about what you see as strategies that are particularly making a difference in Virginia?
My favorite topic. Yes. Okay, so the governor launched the Chronic Absenteeism Task Force, and it was all about identifying what is the data showing as to where those gaps are for our school divisions, who's doing it best, and how do we scale those best practices. So for example, because for 2 years, our families have been told, please don't come to school, please don't come to school, we partnered up with the pediatricians, Secretary of Health and Human Resources within the governor's secretariat, and really brought in pediatricians onto that task force to put collateral out into pediatricians' offices, and really partnered with our school nurses on when and what are the symptoms to keep your student at home and when are they needed. And it really has helped change the narrative because 2 years for a long time of being told, please stay at home, we had to counter that message, and we needed the medical community to come alongside of us. We also really dug in on breaking down silos, both within our agency and in the field. We had these fantastic transportation directors and amazing attendance specialists who all had data, and they were not cross-mapping their data. And so we had them looking at, you assume kids are taking this 80-passenger yellow bus Monday through Friday, but where are those gaps? And if they're not taking it, how can we help you personalize some of those transportation options? Now we have second chance buses, walking school buses, bike bus fleets, and other options that divisions have found really help close that access barrier, especially if a student on a Thursday is at grandma's house, but we didn't think about that for the routes, and that has been a game changer. We are really excited because our data right now is only 3 times a year, and so we are in the midst of building out a daily poll for live attendance data, which will benefit our school divisions on the ground, seeing students earlier where those flags are coming about before they're chronically absent. And so that the governor has been a huge champion for, so that we have much more timely, actionable data. Our community partners, I mean, we said it in our name, it's all in Virginia, it's everybody. And so our faith leaders have been phenomenal, not only coming alongside, but also being those champions. Our coaches and the Virginia High School League have been instrumental in helping to reaffirm, and also you get to play if you show up. I cannot underscore how grateful Attendance Works has been in a partner. We put out an action toolkit full of replicable, scalable best practices. And then that has informed over the last 2 years, we've had attendance symposiums, sold out, standing room only, because the solutions are all on the bright spots, what's working, how can you scale it, the logistics, the gurus who are on the ground. And we're shouting out the divisions that have jumped 16%, 30%. What did they do? How did they do it? How can this work even if it's for 5 of your students or 10 of your students here or 20 of your students here? And we have these webinars on a standing basis on bright spots and success stories. And when you twist it around the opportunity and the momentum, that's where we have really seen all of our divisions come in. I could talk about this for an hour. So those are a few of my favorites.
And I think what you're really giving a sense, and both of you, has been, this isn't, again, one strategy. It's a set of strategies and building this deeply into your systems. And I love the point that you made about real-time data, which I think, just to clarify, when Charlene said she has they went from, I think, 17.7 to 17.2%. Connecticut's actually the first state to release the 24-25 data in a public way, which is really helpful. States are also, in both your states, creating internal dashboards for folks to be able to use, but having that data in enough time to take action is what's been so essential. Charlene, can you talk about 1 or 2 of your most effective strategies that you've seen?
Certainly, and the data is really key. As I said, I look at data and transparency as a part of the accountability tool, and not just for us at the state agency, but also for districts. And so when you have families and community partners that can go online and look at a school and look at a grade level and see what's happening, and they have that information on a monthly basis, that is actionable data that you can use to do a lot of different things. So that really is important. But let me just go back to the program I referenced, the initiative, the Learner Engagement and Attendance Program. So LEAP program, and thanks Hetty, who helped us build the program, as I mentioned before, with funds that the governor provided, initially $10 million, so we could build this program. And what is LEAP? It's a research-based relational home visiting model that we now know, based on the research, because it's been studied, increased student attendance and family engagement. And what this looks like, really home visitors establishing relationships with families, really knocking on the doors if necessary when the data show that the students are kind of falling into that pattern of attendance, of missing school, to say, how can we help you? What are the challenges, and how can we help you navigate those challenges? These home visitors, they're trained. They go in, provide that level of support. Is it transportation? Is it housing? And so imagine then you're working with community organizations or with us or other sister state agencies, because, oh, by the way, jointly putting information out with my state public health commissioner, right, about back to school and immunizations and staying in school healthy, really important. And so this is what these home visitors are doing. And we had them, again, rigorously studied, and I can tell you, and I always like to do this so I don't make any mistake, the evaluation studies has confirmed that 6 months after the first LEAP home visit, attendance rates improved by approximately 10 percentage points for students in K-8, grades K through 8, and nearly 16 percentage points for students in grades 9 through 12. And the last research evidence showed that 10 percentage point reduction in the likelihood of behavior incidents 5 to 6 months after the LEAP home visit. So we're talking about building relationships with our families, with our communities, and they really look to the home visitor for assistance. And so we've built it. We now have resources to scale that. And even for those districts that didn't get LEAP funding, they've come to the 101 training. So they're using other resources in order to do that. Sometimes it's teachers and school staff, and sometimes it's trusted messengers in community organizations that's a part of that work. So that is one of the strategies that I believe is working really, really very well for us in Connecticut. Relationships matter. Students having somebody trusted when they come to school, or the message sometimes, the call that's made to say, we miss you. Making that connection, that you recognize that you're valued in the space, and we miss you when you're not there, really, really important. And just families sometimes needing to navigate. I've heard these stories, and they're real. And what you've said, Hetty, which is so important, you may address a barrier today, and the family may have similar barriers next week. And so it's not a one and done. So how do you understand the community, and how is it that our families feel that they're trusted folks that they can talk with, and building those relationships? So really, it is a model that shows that family engagement, which we know is so important, is really important in this space. So we really try to lead with the data. Our initiatives are targeted, they're data informed, and we're measuring impact. So it's not just about data for having data, but how do you utilize it to make sure that you can lean in. When we recognized and saw the uptick in the months of February, and we saw that, we mobilized. We had a press conference with the governor. We went out and visited a school, sending the message that it is okay to be in school, it's safe to be in school, which is important. So that's, again, the link to having the data to be able to use that. But the LEAP program is one that we highly recommend others really taking a look at. We've had many states that have participated in that training, including Canada, and maybe some other places as well.
I didn't know they were a state. Just checking.
But so important that works. And you can go on our website, by the way, and find more information on the reports that we put out. And identifying bright spots is also really important.
I'd love to quickly just echo off of the commissioner on the relationship side with students. We, with some of your recommendations, launched Breakfast After the Bell, and it created community within classrooms, especially for our older students, which was a game changer, and the one caring adult for every child, and having that gut check. So in addition to family engagement, Those were two additional strategies that build off of this theme on relationships and that Attendance Works helps advise us on that have really led to meaningful changes in many of our school divisions.
So I want to ask you about your role as a chief state school officer, because part of what you all revealed is that the way we move this work, even though we have a history of truancy, which is sort of using shame and blame, which we have not found to work to build the relationships that then allow us to understand the causes of chronic absence. How do you, as chief state school officers, ensure that districts and localities are beginning the work by building relationship and understanding what those causes of absence are so they can create interventions that address those root causes? What's your role in doing that? And also making sure that you can scale up when you find a particular cause or challenge, if that makes sense. Because you're not working at the local level, you're working at the state level.
Right. So for us, I just want to hit on what my colleague said. By the way, I'm learning a lot here from Virginia and Connecticut. I've been taking notes. So thank you very much. And I'm never capable of original thought anyway, so I steal unabashed theft. So we have a district that's been highlighted in a podcast called Solo Story, which is all about the literacy adventures in our country. Steubenville, Ohio, on the Ohio River, Appalachia, incredibly poor community, does not have resources, and yet 90-some% of their kids pass a third grade reading guarantee. They have kids ready, they have kids coming into kindergarten ready. The one thing that stood out beside the mechanics and the technical issues of the curriculum and immediate intervention and progress monitoring, all those things, was the culture of the building. They do home visits when little Johnny doesn't show up. They care for kids. There's a story in the podcast where a little girl comes into the school and she's crying, and a teacher, takes her away from the other kids and says, "What's the problem?" "I didn't have an opportunity to brush my hair, and my hair looks really bad." Teacher took her in the classroom, gave her a brush, brushed her hair. Now that may seem like a little minute thing, but to that kid, that mattered, because the culture of I care is really, really important in our schools. It's really important throughout the school system. And so I can't emphasize enough the responsibility that we all have. It's just not on state chiefs, just not on school superintendents or principals or others, is that making sure that every kid feels cared for is really, really should be a foundational strategy. And it's really not hard to do. It's not, it doesn't take a technical set of skills to do that. It's just putting yourself out there and making sure that you matter, that kid matters to folks. So I just want to say that. And if you ever get a chance to read about Steubenville or get a chance to visit Steubenville, I encourage you to do it. It's phenomenal what they're doing with literacy. Our governor's put in a little over $1 billion in wellness funds in our state since he stepped into office. $1 billion. That those wellness funds can be used for exactly what it says, for mental and physical well-being for each child. And so our districts have a set of appropriated funds. It's now part of our funding formula. So it's there. And that's been a game changer for a lot of districts to use that, because the minimum requirement of the use of those wellness funds, you have to engage with at least one community partner. At least one community partner. So that starts to get districts to really think about this notion of community, leveraging assets in the community. I'm going to keep hitting that theme because I think it's so important. We do school-based health clinics. We have an appropriation for school-based health clinics, bringing primary health care to schools. I always say that makes these services unavoidable for parents, right? Because most schools are the epicenter of a community.
So what I'm hearing you say is that part of what you're doing as a state chief is identifying that health and wellness is especially post-pandemic, is a key issue. And you're
one of our
partnering
priorities.
with your governor to make sure that those resources and your legislature are then in place for schools to use.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you have to take care of the whole child. It's just not about making sure kids can read or, you know, they will read when they are cared for. They will read when given the kind of instructional expertise they need to have, but they have to have that kind of Maslow's basic fundamental, you know, kind of opportunities for wellness. I think the other thing too, and I just want to mention this, we really got to rethink. When we look at our data in Ohio, no grade level has acceptable attendance right now, but we particularly have acute absenteeism in kindergarten and first grade. And then it levels back down. I mean, the attendance improves in the primary grades, and then it starts going up in middle school, and then it really goes up in high school. And I'm a former high school principal. This is what you look like after 10 years of being a high school principal. But I am absolutely convinced the American high school is it is obsolete. It is not structured to do what we need it to do today. And I think of a couple things. Here's what I would like to see. If every student could walk out as they walk out of high school, if every student could say this phrase, I know who I am, I know what I want to do, and I have adults that will help me get there. If every kid could say that in some way, and then think about the American high school, where does that happen? You know, I mean, okay, I'm gonna really. So here's the deal. I'm going to attend my 50th high school reunion this summer. Now I know you're all shocked, saying he can't be that old. So I appreciate that. But my 50th high school reunion, my brother is a superintendent in the school where I graduated from. I went back there a couple years ago. And that high school looks pretty much like it did when I was in high school. 7 periods a day, 50-minute periods, 3 minutes of passing time, got to take X number of credits. And where's the opportunity for kids to discover who they are? And so we need to grab kids' hearts and their minds, and I'll stop monopolizing the conversation now. But I'm on a high horse about this, and we've got to change the American high school.
So, thank you. I actually know it's about time for Q&A from the audience. So I want to just check with Greg if we're having some questions that are starting to come in here. And if not, I'm going to, it looks like Charlene really wants to jump in. I'm going to let you jump in. Go for it.
Go for it, Charlene.
Well, you asked a really key question, and it's about the role of leaders in this space and education leaders in this space. And I think it's really important that we think about our education leaders as visionaries, right? It's effective leaders see before others. And that's what you do with the data that you have, and how do you use your role, whether mobilizing your colleagues. Just quickly, Hedy, we authored an article about 9 years ago about addressing chronic absence. And we talked about 6 strategies, which I think really talk about the role of the state chief. Build awareness, right? How do you become the person who helps folks understand this particular issue? Use data to promote action, right? We've talked about that here. Cultivate champions to build the state-level infrastructure. That could be the governor, the legislature, or just other key folks within the community that you need to be working with. And build capacity. That means building capacity within my state agency for those who are able to do that work to support our school districts. Identify and leverage bright spots. And so I do that. When you find districts that's doing this well, how do you get them together as peers to understand what their peers are doing and to make sure you share that information loudly, right? So they can continue to do that work and foster accountability. And accountability at the state agency level, which also is accountability at the district level. I think you put all that together, and as a leader, being able to foster those, I think is just a great thing to do.
Thank you. And so, folks, if you have a question, now is the time to start letting us know. Bashan?
So I don't have a question. I just want to thank Dr. Bishan, trustee, and it's funny. So I don't have a question. I just want to thank you guys for the panel. My name is Dr. Bishan Trusty, and I am the executive director of the Educators Empowerment Center. And I've had the pleasure of working with Attendance Works. I've worked with Columbus City Schools in Ohio. I've worked with 3 schools on attendance in Connecticut. And, you know, there's just 2 things that I'm taking that I appreciate the most, and I've been doing this work since 2013. is culture, collaboration, and cash are the fundamentals to really get this work going. And I really appreciated proactive redundancy, because a lot of times school districts want to know what's the silver bullet, what's the answer, and it's doing a whole lot of the same things at the right time with the right people. And so thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And please do introduce yourself. Yes, in the plat.
Hi, Sierra Hart, Assistant Director of State Advocacy and Engagement with EdTrust. Again, thank you so much for this panel. I was really interested to hear about all of the cross-district strategy. Coming from a state perspective, what were the tools and strategies that you implemented to ensure that districts with their unique needs were able to still implement your strategies and campaigns across the state?
Well, I'll jump in, just that we have been working really hard to teach not only what data you have available, but then how to make it actionable, and really seeing every student. And I think some divisions in Virginia did that better than others. And so what is the data telling? How do you cross-map it? And breaking down silos in the agency as well has been critical. So our Office of Behavioral Health team has led on attendance, but they do not do it alone, and we can't use that data alone. And so not only do we've been modernizing our agency, adding an Office of Excellence and Best Practices, but making sure that the weight of how to inform practices doesn't fall on just one team that then has been instrumental on the ground. We can make sure you have our toolkit, because a lot of it is from divisions and capturing those best practices and how they scaled them, how they use them. If you're struggling with X, here's what you can do, and how to account for those unique community strengths and areas where they need some support.
And Leanne, I would all just add one thing that I saw Virginia also do when they were identifying which schools, based on their data, most needed intensive support. Before they released the data publicly, you actually built in supports for those schools to learn about how to take tools and reduce chronic absence. So then when they're publicly identified, they can come up with a strategy. And I know that in some places, you're getting sometimes pushback like, oh, why are you holding me accountable for chronic absence with these are things that are beyond my control? But by actually developing capacity, and I think in all of your states, you've invested in that capacity building, you make sure that schools aren't feeling like they're being held accountable for something they can't actually address.
Yes, our attendance team is fully wrapped around to make sure that we can help each unique school division, and especially those where that's their biggest gap. We know getting students back to learning is critical, and that they don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, I would add that just like schools shouldn't think that they're in this alone, going back to that partnership first and leveraging intermediaries in your state. Same thing is true at the state level with other agencies. So we have a new agency called Department of Children and Youth that serve families from children 0 to 5. And there's a full court press going on there. They're fully aligned with the science of breeding. They're even rethinking their reimbursements for preschool. And where parents don't show up, or the kids don't show up, they're thinking about walking back some of that reimbursement as an accountability feature to say, this is really important. And you may lose this reimbursement if you can't get your child to school, kind of thing. We work with Job and Family Services in the state. We work with our Department of Higher Education, Office of Workforce Transformation. So there's a number of state agencies that have all come around on this topic of not only attendance, but ultimately then workforce readiness, hence workforce in our title, workforce readiness as kids matriculate through the system. So agencies can do this. Cabinet agencies under the leadership of a governor can come together and figure out how they contribute to these kinds of things, because they're touching families from a lot of different places beyond what we do. I also want to acknowledge Jessica Horowitz-Moore. She's our chief of, we have a whole division in our agency devoted to whole child, and she's the chief of that division. She's been running point for us, and she also is here to handle me.
So one more in the back.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Abdul Kareem Ewing Boyd. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives Pre-K-12 in the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Education here in Washington, D.C. I was wondering, Commissioner Russell Tucker, if you could talk a little bit more about how you engaged with students who are not in school. How are you learning from students who are absent about why they're absent and why they would want to come back to school?
Great question. And I talked about our home visitors, really making sure that they're connecting with students and hearing from them. Our campaign was built on what we've heard from families and grandparents about what the barriers are for school. So you hear from the students as well, and their voices are really important. And I appreciate the flexibility that districts must have to determine what is it that they really need, what is unique about their student population, and what it is that they need to implement. And so hearing from those students are really important. When I do get a chance to talk to students, always wanted to find out, why do I want to get up every day and come? And so we can think about external barriers, about what happens outside the schoolhouse doors, but we also have to take a look at what happened inside the schoolhouse doors as well. I think we have to have a holistic approach around that. What it is that we do to make sure that learning is relevant, and students really are coming every day because they really want to be there. So we have to do that work as well, and we can learn a lot from talking to our students to talk about their own engagement.
Thank you. We are actually running out of time. I'm going to ask one last question and ask you if you guys can answer it in a one-sentence answer.
Whoa.
So this is a big challenge. The question is, if you were to identify a big bet issue that we need to keep an eye out on to address to make sure that chronic absence continues to reduce in the coming year, what would it be? That is the thing on your mind that you're feeling like we need to address and invest in?
I'll start. For us, again, using our data, because we see where we've got the increases, high schools is really where we're focusing for the upcoming year, because we've seen reductions at the other grade levels. That is one we need to talk about, which goes to what Stephen was saying. What's high school about? And we need to be really working hard on that. That's where we're looking.
That's my big bet. I mean, I already articulated that. I believe in the 3 R's of high school: rigor, relevance, and relationships. I mean, until we connect kids to that they can walk out our buildings with a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and access to social capital, that's our job. And we just do not do as good a job as we need to do that. So high schools have to be rethought.
We are on a mission to move away from seat time and really deliver more flexibility on where, when, and how kids are learning. And it'll definitely benefit our high school students. But that, we think, is the biggest bet that will be a game changer for getting more kids engaged and designing better models that are built around students and their needs.
Can I ask everyone to give our panel a huge round of applause?
Yay, thank you all.
Thank you so much, and to be continued. Matt?
All right, welcome back for panel 2. And for those who can hear me in the snack area, you can make your way back to your seats. For our second panel, we've got a great panel here, and I'm going to do introductions now. Immediately to my left is Augustus Mays. He's the Vice President of Partnerships and Engagement at EdTrust. If you don't know, EdTrust works across the nation for educational equity, from preschool through college, through research and advocacy. Ray Saldana is President, next to my left, of Communities in Schools, a national organization that surrounds students with a community of support to help them stay ahead in school and achieve in life. And at the far end there is Sonia Brookins-Santelises, Superintendent of Baltimore City Public Schools. And we want to talk today about what school districts can do and how community organizations and advocates can help, particularly around absenteeism. So Sonia, I'm going to start with you. You've been superintendent in Baltimore for 9 years, going on 10, is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, indeed. That itself deserves some applause. Now, I think that I've heard that comes with a full plate and a number of competing priorities. Amidst all those, how does addressing chronic absenteeism, how did that become a priority for you?
So chronic absenteeism has always been a challenge in Baltimore City, and a lot of that is, high concentrations of poverty in different places. But like we heard earlier, like I know the panelists and a lot of people know, the real reckoning came after COVID with close to 2 years, just about 18 months in Maryland, where children were physically not in school. And so, the long-standing, what I used to call the tradition or routine of going to school got disrupted. And so we had to get really serious in a very different way. So we had always had challenges of chronic absentee rates between 20 and 30%. That just about doubled, more than doubled after COVID. So when we were getting ready to return and we saw some of the early figures, we knew immediately, both from data and just on the ground, that if we couldn't tackle chronic absenteeism, then nothing else, frankly, would work in terms of any of our instructional endeavors. So I think that's when we really knew we had to go deep in a different way.
Ray, I want to turn to you and give you a chance to sort of introduce communities and schools. I mean, you're in a lot of communities and a lot of schools. So I want to hear about your spread, but also how chronic absenteeism became a priority in your work.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. I think it's important to just kind of set the stage of what it is we do at communities and schools, because you've heard glimpses of it as our state chiefs talked about what it means to be going from sort of messaging and the mechanics of how to approach chronic absenteeism down to the school and the integrated, I think we heard our director talked about the multi-tiered system of support. How is that integrated for us at communities and schools? That's about 110 communities in 29 states, and the most important feature of that is 5,000 staff that we place inside schools. So they are the integrators. They are the navigators to connect students to those resources. And we like to focus on those schools that are Title I eligible or high poverty. So we want to go into the places where the work is needed the most. Chronic absenteeism actually is an issue. I'll sort of blend the both personal and professional here, because it was 10 years ago that I was a elected official. I was on the city council in San Antonio, which is where I call home. And I was seeing it from the other end. It was going on police ride-alongs, but I was sitting at a truancy court. And I think it's important to just conceptualize, what does it mean when we're dropping at a statewide level 3, 4, 5%? Because when you're doing this wrong, what it looks like is I'm sitting in this truancy court, and there are family after family, dozens with their kids forced to be there about compliance and not about intervention or relationship, to just go through this surface level understanding and just moving them through a bit of an assembly line. And compliance, assembly line, and the sort of perverse way we sometimes think about how to handle issues is kind of the big backdrop for us at communities and school. Because what we think about, and I'm grateful to steal the language here, is about relationship and a culture of care. So we have 5,000 staff working in 3,500 schools. Other folks call our work wraparound student services, but at communities and schools have been doing this for about 50 years. And those staff members, when I'm listening to why they're there at the truancy court, they're talking about, well, there's a 16-year-old who has to take his 8-year-old's little sister to school, and they constantly miss the first 3 periods where they take attendance. We have families who have had medical issues, a transportation issue. You do have to build relationship with students to find out that those things happen for them. So that's why chronic absenteeism is so important for the organization, because we know that what drives an organization that was built on dropout prevention, which we've been doing for a long time, means that you know where the red flags and the early warning indicators are. And that for us is absenteeism. So that is, again, the boots on the ground, the army that we have at communities and schools.
Augustus, EdTrust has been a partner in this work with us, and I appreciate that. But tell me a little bit more, and the audience, a little bit more about EdTrust's work, and particularly how the chronic absenteeism issue has been a priority.
Yeah, like Ray, I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal first, right? So yes, my day job at EdTrust, I'm the Vice President of Partnerships and Engagement at EdTrust. But my most important title is Dad. I have 3 kids, 6, 11, 14, so elementary, middle school, high school. And so every day for me, right, in terms of how my wife and I approach attendance and prioritizing it, It shows up, right? Like me in the morning at 7 a.m. trying to figure out where my daughter's homework is so she can get it in her bag and get to the bus stop on time so she shows up on time. It shows up for me, right? If my son is feeling sick, has a cough, my wife and I have to make that decision, right? Does he go to school? Do we keep him home, right? So we know, right, every day, making that decision about showing up to school is a decision that is based in inputs that produces the outcomes that we want. So predictable transportation, making sure that, right, we have the ability to ensure that our kids and the school knows what we need to make sure that our kids can show up. So for us, we prioritize school every day as a priority. However, as an advocate and at EdTrust, and I appreciated the data that you showed at the top of your remarks, is that we look at the data to drive policy solutions and practice changes. And given what we've seen in the pandemic and its impact on chronic absenteeism, particularly for Black, brown, and low-income students, and the gaps that we're seeing there, for us, and me as an advocate, when I think about the choices that families have to make every day, I know my circumstances that I just described to you aren't the circumstances for many of families, right, that are attending those low poverty districts that you outlined. And also, those choices aren't their fault, right? It's not the student, it's not the parent, it's the conditions that surround the family. And so at EdTrust, we're trying to make sure that we identify, right, when it comes to chronic absenteeism, like Commissioner Russell Tucker said, right, we're trying to think of ways in which we can build the capacity of states to support districts to do the work. We can identify the data and use the data to drive interventions and strategies that are research-based, that are evidence-based, that we're trying to provide the necessary resources in schools so that we know what is needed. So for me, like I think many parents, right, I want my kids and every kid in this country to want to go to school every day and to be excited about that. And so at EdTrust, we're trying to partner with the willing, so like AEI, like Attendance Works, like states who've committed to this pledge, to create the conditions that when we're having all these life choices in our lives, that going to school is an easy choice.
I want to ask all three of you about this, but Sonia, I'm going to start with you again. The key drivers, like what are the drivers here? And there's a sort of permanent question, what are the drivers of chronic absenteeism and attendance problems? And then there's also the pandemic question. We saw it rise across the board, and our response to that has got to be informed by a theory of the case. So what's your theory of the case?
Well, and I think it's really helpful because I can't remember who, but in the previous panel, someone actually asked the question, what are the young people telling us?
Yes.
And that is actually where we started. We start with what are the young people telling us? What are their families telling us? And so a lot of what we found is, again, one of the themes, and I don't know if I have some kind of sexy new answer, but one of the themes is relationship-based, right? Yeah. It is there somebody who is actually going to miss that I am not there? And we particularly see that at all levels, but I think it shows up very differently, whether you're in elementary or high school. In high school, what we heard, particularly coming back from the pandemic, I think it was always there, but we heard it in stereo coming back was, so why would I come back to school? Mm-hmm. What is there to come back to school for? You had young people, particularly in Baltimore City, who got employment during that time. And for a 16, 17-year-old whose prefrontal cortex isn't fully there, if you've got to tell me, this $18 an hour job from Amazon or coming to a place that I may or may not feel like there's something there compelling me, I'm going to make that decision. And the beautiful thing about kids in Baltimore, young people in Baltimore, is they give it to you straight. I mean, they will tell you in a heartbeat, you know what? I don't really know. I walk away with a check here. When I go to this other place called school, I'm kind of left wondering, what is it going to yield, right? Where is it going to be? And I think we had to start in both places. We had to start with this why theme of why school, but it was foundational to this question of, is there anybody who actually sees me? anybody who actually knows. And so we went hard on relationships, and we went hard, frankly, on rethinking high school supports. We had to double down on a lot of our career pathway work, but not just career pathway, being able to allow young people, and I was so glad to hear, I think it was Virginia, is really thinking about how do we redo seat time and what credit young people get for learning. I will tell you, at one of our carpentry programs, we have a group of young people who are refurbishing an old abandoned brownstone across the street, townhouse across the street. One young man told me, I now come to school because I know in order to get across the street to actually work on that townhome, I have to go through a math class and an English class first. And so this idea of allowing young people to kind of give us, frankly, the hard feedback about what school has kind of lost meaning, I think is essential. And to just kind of explain away and expect young people now to say, oh, you just have to go to school because you have to go to school. Frankly, they have other more compelling choices. And so we've had to do a lot of case making with them. And then, again, I don't think we blame families, but I think we have to also understand, and we've been able to partner with our mayor the last 2 years on this, which has been invaluable. We actually have families, particularly in the very early grades, in pre-K and kindergarten. If you look at our data, that was a challenging grade level for us. And some of it was families saying, well, it was raining today, and I wasn't quite sure it was all that essential for them to be there. I mean, aren't you guys just playing? Well, what we've seen is in our Judy centers, right, which really start with families when kids are still in toddler stage, we're actually exposing families to this is what early learning actually means for your young person. And I don't think it's people deliberately saying they don't care about their kids, but again, we haven't been clear. And a lot of times in education, we assume everybody understands what the value of what we're offering is, and that's not true. What we've seen is when you actually show and demonstrate the value, people respond.
Ray, a similar question to you. You've been doing this for a long time in communities and schools longer, before and after the pandemic. What do you see the drivers, and where do you find an edge on them?
One, I want to say I'm so glad that I'm sitting next to our superintendent, because she went exactly to a place that I think if you leave the doors here today and think that solving for chronic absenteeism is, one, at the feet of our superintendents and our schools without thinking about the more comprehensive approach, you're making a mistake. Yes. And you're also making a mistake if you think that maybe it is just, if we could lift some of the barriers for poverty, if we could just focus on healthcare. I mean, what Superintendent Santelices is describing is, I think, something that is truly missing from school, which, how do you think about, it's not drivers of chronic absenteeism, but how do we think about dignity at school? And I think it is important to choose, because of the 13 million students, close to 30% of students who are missing, not all of them are sick. And some of them are choosing, including their parents, not to send their students to school. We know, and because we have a lot of data about what that means for a student to feel like, is there somebody there who cares about me? We're going back to this theme. Is there somebody who is going to miss that I'm there? This culture of care that was described in Ohio. And if we, I think, have made a mistake over the last several decades, it's that we will capture a lot of reduction in chronic absenteeism by solving for the problems. And we'll say, here's a student, let's solve their problem. Here's the family, let's solve that problem. There's a community in a neighborhood, let's solve those problems, and we'll start to drive down chronic absenteeism. But the bigger question is, so grateful that the superintendent talked about this, is what are our consumers saying about what it means to come to school? And if you can find, the reason this feels personal for me is that if you can find somebody at that school who's a caring adult who cares about you as a person, not to say that we don't want to drive academic results, but it matters enough to know that somebody there cares about you, because that unravels a different pattern to find a discovery that is important, which is, when I was looking and watching some of those students who were coming through truancy court, I asked myself, gosh, they didn't have a Mrs. Reyes. And so Mrs. Reyes she's my CIS site coordinator. That's the staff member who's placed in. They're not there to grade me. They're there to help find students, to build resources, to connect students to the things that are standing in their way. And that is hard to do. Imagine being in our superintendent's seat for the last 10 years and saying, okay, I've got I've got tests I got to worry about. I've got issues around proctoring. I've got to support the staff. And I got to provide wraparound student services. And I've got to focus on this chronic absenteeism. Another yet significant problem to put onto their shoulders. And I've got to ask the students the important question of what is this? Is it relevant to you? Is it rigorous? And does it provide what it is that is going to make you show up the next day? And I think that is probably a bigger question around the trust that we haven't fully built into schools, or relationships that are not dug into it. And then I think following that, it's how do you scale that? Because we've heard Virginia and Connecticut talk about, I would just say, the unsexy work of having to go to somebody's doorstep, find them, discover what the pattern was or why the problem exists, and then truly build a relationship that makes them feel a sense of trust to want to come back in. So now I think, again, it's not just about solving for poverty or for healthcare issues. You'll get certain percentage drops of that, but beyond that, it's this larger question. And I think more than ever, schools or students and families are choosing with their feet where they want to go, and also whether they're not going. And I think we would be making a mistake to not just think about that as a driver as well.
Augustus, when you're working on this from the advocacy front, it's a tough balance. I think, even from your introductory remarks, the family's got to roll. You got to get that homework in the backpack. At the same time, a lot of times the framing is like, well, schools can't do anything, or it's all up to the parents and it's their responsibility. How do you balance that framing so families and students have a part, but there's also a narrative that builds substantive political and community support for real change?
Yeah, so first I want to give a shout out to my colleague in the back there, Carl Felton at EdTrust, who leads our social and emotional academic and development work, but he really helps lead us in sort of thinking about, through our conversations with state and district leaders, through our numerous conversations with parents and families, like what are the things, right, at the district and building level, at the school level, that folks should be focused on. And the first would be, and I think I am so excited to hear from the first panel, and someone who's come from the education research community, and that's been a sort of central part of my sort of existence in ed policy, is that data and how we use data is so important. And the first thing that we always try to make sure that state and local leaders understand is that you need to analyze data with families, not at them. So I heard a lot on the first panel, so especially Commissioner Tucker, talking about disaggregating data and understanding by race, by income, by disability, by language, like what are the challenges, what are the barriers that are keeping students from coming to school? And then when you make that shift, right, now you're looking at a more solutions-oriented conversation with families rather than blaming them. And as a personal example, my daughters, right, they were in school during the pandemic, 3rd grade and kindergarten. That next school year after 2020, I mean, my 4th grader then was having challenges, right, around wanting to go to school. And we missed consecutive days in a row in one period of the school year. And I will give credit to our Superintendent McDade. I love that Virginia was highlighted as one of the states that are doing great things. But one of the things that our district did was we made sure that they brought us in, right? The school brought us in. We looked at the data. They asked me the question. So, what's the issue around why your daughter's missing school? Or the days that you showed up, what was it that the school did well to get your daughter to come? So I think looking at that data and understanding the kid, not a number, but actual person, and the school investing in the time to sit down with families is important. 2 other things. I would say the importance of co-designing those plans. So once, an attendance plan. So once we sat down with the school, the next step was to really sort of map out, right? Like how are we gonna keep her on track, but how are we gonna keep her on track academically? And so I think a lot of the things that EdTrust, when we sort of engage in conversations with state and local leaders, we say, okay, don't do a robocall and just say, hey, you missed, or send a letter, which I know a lot of parents in here receive those letters. What does that mean to me, right? Establish trust, establish a relationship with families. So you're doing 2-way texting, you're doing home visits, you're creating, right, a plan around, returning to school that is really focused on the academics, but also focusing on all the factors outside of school and in school that get the kid to come back. And then the last thing, again, I'm still pointing to you, Commissioner Russell Tucker, is I think one of the great things you said on your panel, and I told you I was going to lift it up, is I think you also have to invest in trust builders, right? That's what I'm calling it. So that is the community school coordinators, that is the school nurses, that is, right, your building leaders who are really leaning in to really truly understand the students within their building, and making sure that at the state level, at the district level, and at the school level, we're providing the resources and support for those people to do the work.
Sonia Ray, I'm going to ask you a very similar question. You come from different places, and I want that perspective on it. It seems to me that there's sort of a dual task here to turn around a lot of families. Some of it is the supports, and whether that may be sufficient, necessary but not sufficient. You also have to make a plea to a lot of families to change behaviors that they've become accustomed to. I mean, there's a lot of students that are now used to missing more schools. We've seen it in the data. It's just sort of the entire distribution has shifted. How do we equip schools or folks working in schools to make that case to parents, to kind of get them to rethink the routines, to talk to students in high school who are a little bit more in control of their attendance and say, here's the case, we got to change the behavior?
Okay. So one of the things that we have found particularly effective on this front is, again, and I hate to be a broken record, but I kind of don't, in that it's a lot easier to have pointed conversations with a family when you are in relationship with them. It goes back to this, if I'm just receiving a letter, if you're texting me with your beep that I popped in your data point, the incentive, the trust is not there. What we have found actually, and I've had community leaders, I was talking to Akil Trice, who is a leader of one of our big community partners, the movement team, and I go with him on some of the home visits to some of our kids who are most challenged with chronic absenteeism. And what I found, and he would say to me, Sonia, you're talking to them like somebody in North Avenue. Like you're asking all of the things that are wrong, and is it this or that? When Akil sits down with them, it's like he's sitting down with a cousin or a family member. Mm-hmm. He's learned enough about their world to be able to say, yep, we know that sneakers, you need sneakers for the first day. I got you sneakers, but now you got to give me something. You got to give me 10 days straight in school. Now, Nate sitting down, Nate, Akil sitting down and doing that, it's because of his proximity. It's because of the relationship he has that allows him to do that ebb and flow. And I do agree with you. Like, some of this is accountability conversations. Yeah. I've had a community members who are like, girl, please, you are over here trying to give 50 times to do this, that, and the other. I am telling you, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to have a conversation with mom and say, you're just going to have to go to whatever your thing is after the kids get to school. And amazingly, the kids are in school. So this idea for me about partnering with community, we kind of say it glibly, and I know Ray can talk about it as well, but I've got to tell you, I think some of it is school systems, school leaders have to realize that this partnership is crucial, because there is a relationship that when I leave to go home every day, they see people on weekends, they know where they live, they know where they were. A kid will pull up a kid like, wait a minute, you weren't in school. You told me you wanted a job. And literally he's helping the young person find a job, but you didn't meet your end of the bargain. And we'll sit down and have that kind of conversation. I think what we're trying to do is have accountability without relationship. And then we have faux pas relationship, which is just over and over again, how come it's not working, I'm not supporting. Well, because you're coming in and you're dropping supplies like a supply plane. You drop a few things that I need, and then you're out. And again, I will just say what the young people in Baltimore have taught me is, if you are not ready to commit on the long term, don't bother. because I don't need a drop-in somebody. I need someone who is committed to me. And if you look at our chronic absentee data, the schools and the young people that had the biggest declines were the ones that had the largest chronic absentee rates. And that's because we poured into those schools people who had those connections, who were comfortable working with community members and being able to partner. So teachers partnering and saying, I can't do that and prep my history lesson. And I think we had asked teachers to do that, and they just don't have the time, not and learn science of reading, right? You need a network of people who can actually come in and do it boots on the ground. Like we say community partnership, but there's a whole lot of different ways to partner with community. And we have found, I mean, if you look at our schools that had 65% chronic absentee rate and in 3 years have declined 38%, there's schools that have invested in those kind of relationships with community, being there, and again, making sure that the needs of the family are part of that. But I do think it does need to be a blend. And you know me enough to know I'm not all Mary Sunshine. Like I can be very old school. But I also know you can't be whole school with people you don't know. Yep. And you can't, quote, pull people up if you don't have enough of a knowledge of what they're really going through and you have skin in their game.
Yes.
Right?
Well, this is a
tough act to follow.
No, I mean, of course it is. But it's appropriate that we're sitting right next to each other, because one of the things that is at the top of the inbox of every superintendent, in my guess and estimation, is a number of outside providers, vendors who are coming in to say, here's what I can do to help you solve your problem. And what's interesting about the work at communities and schools, and I think underneath your question is, how do we work with community partners or nonprofits who are working inside schools? Our founder is a gentleman named Bill Milliken. In 1977 is when he started CIS, Communities in Schools. And his saying is that it's not programs that are transforming young people's lives, it's relationships. So it is this key focus. And that extends even to community partners and providers who want to support our school districts. But at the same time, it can't be seen as a plug-in or nice to have. And the most important aspect to doing this work effectively is being committed for the long haul. I think you talked about this, Nat, at the beginning, about nothing is going to be changed overnight here. But I can't tell you how critical it is that we get away from these starts and stops of really thinking about whole child supports, and maybe we get a grant that's worth a year or 2 years, but as soon as the county pulls it, we rethink about the structure, because that is the hard, again, unsexy work of getting into understanding sometimes I think you need a PhD in systems to navigate how to get a student stable and their family stable housing. Like, it is not something, it is intuitive. It's not intuitive for the family, it's not intuitive for the school district, because these are disconnected systems and you need somebody to help connect them. And so that's our business at Communities and Schools, and we partner with schools to do that. But what's rich in that partnership is a trust, again, to use the word, about using the data to go after those students who oftentimes, when you think about what is holding, what is spiking your absenteeism, it's not the full breadth of the students. Sometimes 10, 15, 20% of the student population. If you could just focus on that, that would release the anchor to help support. And I think it's important to just, again, put in real terms what it means to knock, at least at the statewide level, but certainly at the countrywide level, by 2 to 3 percentage points chronic absenteeism. And we are in this unique position. Again, we've been at the organization now for 50 years. We've been at it, working inside schools, being very disciplined and religious even about our data system, that we finally have a way to talk about chronic absenteeism that isn't just the impact to the school or to school funding or to the student, but what does it look like if we have significant impact on chronic absenteeism 20 years later for that student? And at CIS, we're not economists, but we worked with economists. There's a famous researcher named Raj Chetty who talks about opportunity in the US. And he reached out to communities and schools. He said, look, you all have been around a long time and you're scaled. So in other words, you're big and old, which is a compliment we will take. We have been around a while and we are big. But he said, I'm curious, we have tax data of students and we want to connect it to the census data that we have, so a rich source. And we're interested to find out what your intervention and what that impact looks like 20 years down the road. If your students were going through a CIS high school in 2000, Where's that student in 2020? Same thing for a number of cohorts. And what we saw was just an incredible impact size to a small-based intervention, and we were curious to see what impact did it have on adult earnings, unemployment, and on adult earnings. Again, the focus was for our intervention, it's over 100,000 in adult earnings in lifetime. And a lot of that due to reducing unemployment for the students that went through a CIS program. But we didn't know what was behind it. What is driving that adult earnings 20 years later, lower unemployment rates, higher access to post-secondary, and lo and behold, it was attendance. They said CIS as an intervention in these schools that we're measuring, it was attendance and being able to increase just by a day per 100 students. A day per 100 students, adding 40 days to a school year at a place like Baltimore City Public Schools can have that kind of impact on a student's well beyond just that intervention or that time in the school. So it isn't just about dropout prevention or increasing absenteeism, it's literally about adult earnings and how that has impact over time for our communities and for really transforming how we think about this particular intervention for the individual student 20 years later, that it has impact on the ability to earn. And again, for Raj Chetty, access to the American dream, access to upward mobility.
Augustus, communities and schools, they're in schools. And Sonia, she governs some schools. Yeah. You work a lot with the advocacy community, trying to help advocates bring their A game and make a difference. But not all of them are in schools. What are the things that you would ask for to enable the advocacy community to make a difference in this?
What I'm loving about today, right, I'm just hearing alignment between our state leaders, hearing alignment between, the superintendent, CIS, and EdTrust. I think what we try to do is we try to train our advocates, right, when we talk about chronic absenteeism, but the importance of attendance, is we want to make sure state and local leaders are making the work visible. So what I loved about the first panel, like Ohio's example of making sure that the governor and Director Dacker, that you guys uplifted this issue, not only, just at the governor's level, who the governor is a champion of the issue, but you worked across the cabinet level agencies to make sure that everybody was coordinated and working together on this. So I think what we love about this challenge, and I love the work that, Hetty, you, Nat, our CEO, Denise, have been working on, is that this challenge prioritized making a long-term commitment to cutting chronic absenteeism, so it's not a one-off. That we train our advocates to ask the questions of local leaders. So how are you committing to this issue? And how are you tying it to the academic experience and also tying it to the culture within my kids' building, that they feel welcome, they feel invited, but they feel like they matter, right? That they're invested in that. And we train our advocates to make sure that we push on how are you making this visible? Like, is this a statewide campaign that you're committing to? And what are the sort of milestones over a long period of time that we're going to see in terms of progress? And then, we want to make sure that our advocates are, investing in holding the state, holding the district, holding the school accountable, because that's what we do as advocates. And so we really lean into the data, right? And again, disaggregate that data, as I said, to take a look at where the inequities are, where are the opportunity gaps around chronic absenteeism, so that every kid is showing up to school. And then the last thing I'll say is that we really focus on, and we make sure our advocates understand to articulate to state and local leaders that they choose, right, belonging over punishment. And so I think, we have seen, and I think you heard on the first panel, there are times, right, the system blames the family. The system uses levers, right, to punish the student, right? So the student might get suspended, or the student might have to have in-school suspension, or the student isn't given the necessary time to catch up on his or her work because the school doesn't know the child's experience, doesn't know why that child is missing school and is falling behind academically. Yes, it's on the onus on the family, but it's, again, the supports around them, the system that supports that. So we always ask those questions around how is the district, how is the school providing that culture of belonging. And that's so, so important because, again, you will see then gains once you invest in the student, once you provide a welcoming environment that the family doesn't feel like you're just looking at them as the problem, but you're working with them to find the solutions. I think that's when policymakers, like we saw today on this first panel, start making the decisions, start launching the initiatives that are going to really make, I think, in the long term, real gains around attendance and academic success.
Okay, well, we have a little less than 10 minutes for questions. As I promised, we have 2 rules here at AEI about questions. Please identify yourself. And then the second rule is ask a question. So if you have, if I can get hands in the air, there's one right here, and then just speak into the microphone.
Yeah, my name is Bill Galston. I'm a senior fellow at Brookings, just down the street. And I'd like to take all of you back to one of Nat's original questions. I think a lot of us had a picture in our heads, let's call it the fire drill model, right? COVID was a fire drill, everybody left the building, COVID ends, everybody comes back into the building. That is not what happened, right? COVID was a much more long-term and fundamental disruptor of the relationship between kids and families on the one hand and schools on the other. I'm amazed by how profound the change is. What happened, right? Families, many families have been troubled or troubled long before COVID, right? Many families didn't have relationships with schools. Many kids didn't have role models or caring mentors in schools. But a lot of them who came to school anyway before COVID aren't doing it now. Something broke. What?
Maybe I can jump in here because I've along with my colleagues and with the organization, been a student of public education and its history and the themes that have really established what it's all about. And there's different eras that I think you can look at when we, for 60 years, for the majority of that, pre-pandemic, we're thinking about, the uniformity, the conformity, the assembly line, the standardization was part of the business model. And the idea at that time for us, as we were growing into this institution, folks were focused on academics like they should be. But I think what's interesting about this checkpoint, and we'll check it again in 2035, but what's interesting about this checkpoint is just to take the example of an organization that likes to focus on non-academic wraparound supports, relationships. What isn't maybe seen as the academics in that aspect is, students can't be turned on to learning until they're turned on to living. And what was so significant about the pandemic was it seemed that folks had really shaken loose to that concept, that you could drive academic results, which was a big focus prior to the pandemic, and we were creating the systems and standards to make that the exclusive focus of school. We didn't care too much about dignity or relationship or love, but it seemed to be that something happened at that moment that I think we should be using, because at our organization, we had grown to about 2,500 schools. That took us about 45 years in 2020. And all of a sudden, now we've grown by 1,000 schools in just the last 5 years. And I think that tells me one of two things. That the imagination of schools and superintendents and principals is, look, that taught us a lot about those undergirded issues. And I have one of three options, or one of a few options. I could ignore it, which I had been doing, and maybe in most cases that was the mass model of, look, let's just focus on the academics. Those that fall by the wayside, they will fall by the wayside. And the pandemic really woke us up to the kind of issues, the baggage, the responsibilities, the adult-sized problems that students have, that if we don't address those, then we'll never be able to drive. And so that is how do I think about that problem? I haven't institutionalized this. And for us at the organization, it's not about us growing our program. I'd love to see this be adopted by schools, because I think we're talking and saying the same thing about what does it look like to bring dignity and respect and love and relationship, and how would a student find that? As much as we're focused on the assembly line and the standardization, and that, I think, is what I'd be curious to measure in 2035, because the trend line, I think, is telling me that folks are waking up to this new notion of how schools should be built. I'll pause.
No. I mean, I wrote an article in the middle of the pandemic about this. So I did an op-ed for Ed Week, and I haven't had a whole lot that has changed about that, and I think it's spread beyond the zip code that might be in Baltimore City. And it is this: I think we had to face, as educators, that through laptops, through devices, through whatever, there were a number of families who saw what their young people were experiencing up close in ways they had not seen before. And I think that cuts across the political spectrum. It cuts across, so whatever it is you thought your students were receiving, you saw what they were actually receiving. So you saw the way your young person might be talked to. You saw the way that teachers moved in spaces. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've heard this from people in ruby red districts, and I heard it from folks in West Baltimore. And there was this notion that school, this compact of trust that we had, that was given, frankly, without a heck of a lot of question, even from people who had not previously been served well by school. Somehow they had a view into it that they had never seen before. And I will tell you, the response I got across the spectrum for that article and naming just that piece elicited so many different responses. And I'm telling you, like I said, across zip code, across political spectrum. And so this idea that there is a compact between schools, education, and communities, I think had been taken for granted. And I don't think a lot of folks liked what they saw for a variety of different reasons. And for me, I have kept that in my head since that time, because I do think that there is a day of reckoning for K-12. There is a day of reckoning when a young person says, I actually found out I don't really need you. Or when a parent says, you know what, I homeschooled my kids. Again, West Baltimore, I'm not talking about rural Utah. West Baltimore, I actually homeschooled my child for 10 months, and guess what? They weren't a behavioral issue. So why are they a behavioral issue when they come to you? So I think it opened up boxes of questions that we as the education establishment were unprepared to answer. I had Black families who said to me, I didn't realize the tone that was being used with my child until I overheard the class. And now I think I'm gonna keep my little Black boy home. And I'm gonna school him myself. So all I think though, and I've said this to educators and principals, I said, look, in a public school system, we are driven by enrollment. I mean, brass tacks, cash, you could call it whatever you want. I love the social compact. At a very base level, you get no money if you have no students. And so at some point, we heard a deluge of families saying to us, I don't think this product you are giving me is quite what I signed up for. And so our ability as a field to hear, adapt appropriately, and to actually be closer in tune to what families are looking for, I think is some of the change. And you don't hear that in education circles. We whisper it in the background. Nobody wants to name it for what it is. But that's what I heard. And like I said, I'm cutting across political spectrum. This is not just I can't say this here, this is not just a Moms for Liberty issue. And this is what I told people. I heard that in West Baltimore. So there's some reckoning about how we do school, how we equip young people, what we view the purpose of school being, that we would do well to actually take a look in the mirror, because now teachers are telling us, I didn't sign up for this, which is why, we've got the dean of Johns Hopkins Ed School here. You don't have a rush of people going into education. So there is something about schooling that came into full relief post-pandemic, that it's not just kids and families, it's now teachers saying, no thank you, not that, which is why we are all scraping, even in private schools, there are private schools that never had turnover that now have turnover, because people are saying, I did not sign up for this. And we have got to get down again and say, what is the purpose of schooling? Are we listening to parents? Are we listening to kids? And are we adjusting? So you can tell I feel passionately about it. But I said it during the pandemic, and I'll say it now.
We keep asking Sonia to come back because she never tells the truth. Anyway, Augustus, I want to give you the last word here.
Why are you gonna make me follow that?
Oh, yeah, indeed.
Sorry.
We've talked a lot about how this needs to be a long-term, sustained effort. Give us some final words on what that takes, especially from the seats of power to go the long haul.
Yeah, I'm going to say thank you, Sonia, for telling the truth, being honest, saying the thing. I think the first thing, based on your question, I think the reason why this issue has raised to the national level, to your point, on one of Nat's initial slides, is that yes, chronic absenteeism has been an evergreen issue for many school systems across this country. Particularly for low wealth districts, it's always been a struggle, right, to find intervention solutions, ways in which kids can feel that their educational experience is relevant, that they matter to their educators, to their building leaders, to their community, to show up to school every day, to see like a reason why they show up. And then also to feel like there are resources that are supporting them, and specifically educators and also other administrators in the system, that they can actually take this work on and make a difference. And I think the reason why, again, it's a national issue now, is that we saw our high achievers, our high performing districts, struggling with this issue. And so the great, opportunity around that is that now we're all focused on what have been the issues, what have been the gaps as to why we haven't been able to solve this problem. And as I said earlier before, it's around choosing belonging over punitive, punishment, right? So I think the system has long used truancy policies, has long used accountability in the wrong way. I'm not saying that we should do without accountability. Accountability is an important driver to create the change that we want to see in our schools and for our kids. But we also have to understand who they are. We have to see our students. We have to see our families. And we have to create strategies, create resources and approaches, right, to addressing chronic absenteeism, like community schools, or investing in ways in which we have more counselors in the building, that we have more home visitors on staff to meet with families, so we can provide and understand the root causes as to why families are not being able to send their students to school, or why students don't feel school matters for them. And as a public education system, we have to get that right. We have to choose belonging over punishment. The second piece is around scaling up what works. We need to invest in research. We need to invest in technical assistance so that when we identify, right, those strategies and solutions that are working, that we want to replicate what Ohio is doing, we want to replicate what Connecticut's doing, we have an evidence base to understand what works, why, and under what context. And so I would say we really, as an advocacy community, as a policy community, really need to lean into scaling up what works, and that is really building the research base. And then the last thing I will say is we got to make it visible. So for those states out there, or for those folks who are watching, I would say, again, have your state sign up to this campaign, right? Cut chronic absenteeism by 50% over 5 years is an outstanding goal. It's doable. It's hard work, but it's doable. And so I would just say to all of you, join the 16 states that have joined. And then also as advocates, as community leaders, as policymakers, we need to get behind our state leaders, support them, as well as hold them accountable at the same time, and really prioritize making this a national issue. And then hopefully, Nat, in 5 years, we will come to this particular event and we'll be celebrating our success.
Put us out of business. Okay, that's all the time that we have for tonight. Again, I want to thank Hetty and all the folks at Attendance Works, and Denise and Lynn and everyone on the Education Trust team. And thank you all for coming, and for those of you who watched, and have a good afternoon.
It's really great to sit on the panel with you. Thanks, it's a pleasure to be on with you. And you never disappoint. The first time I met you, we were at an Aspen round table, and I was